mild spring morning in the German city of Ulm, on March 14, 1879, a child was born who would forever change humanity's understanding of the universe. Hermann and Pauline Einstein welcomed their first child, Albert, into a world on the cusp of extraordinary transformation. The industrial age was reshaping Europe. Electricity was beginning to illuminate city streets, and the certainties of Newtonian physics seemed as solid as the cobblestones beneath people's feet. The Einstein family lived modestly in the old quarter of Ulm, where medieval buildings stood alongside newer structures. Hermann ran an electrical engineering business with his brother Jacob, manufacturing dynamos and electrical meters for the emerging power industry. Pauline, cultured and artistic, filled their home with music, often playing the piano in the evenings. The household breathed an atmosphere of intellectual curiosity mixed with practical entrepreneurship, a combination that would profoundly shape young Albert's character. When Albert was just 15, Chapter 2, The Rebel Student. In the winter of 1894, Albert Einstein made a bold decision that would define his relationship with authority for the rest of his life. Unable to endure another moment at the Luitpold Gymnasium, facing compulsory military service that revolted his pacifist nature, the 15-year-old left Munich without permission. He obtained a medical certificate claiming nervous exhaustion and traveled south across the Alps to join his family in Italy. The act was both an escape and a declaration of independence. His unexpected arrival in Milan shocked his parents, particularly his father, whose business failures had already strained the family's finances. Hermann had hoped Albert would complete his German education and perhaps study electrical engineering to help revive the family business. Instead, his son had abandoned his studies, forfeited his German citizenship to avoid military service, and arrived with no clear plan. The teenager's audacity was matched only by his absolute certainty that he had made the right choice. For the first time in months, breathing the air of Italy, free from Prussian regimentation, Albert felt he could think clearly again. For several months, Albert lived in a state of liberating uncertainty. He helped his father and uncle with their electrical business, traveled through northern Italy, and spent long hours in contemplation. The Italian landscape, with its warmth and relative informality compared to Germany, suited his temperament. He observed the ancient architecture, the art, the more relaxed pace of life. This period of freedom, though brief, renewed his spirit and strengthened his resolve to pursue knowledge on his own terms rather than through conventional channels. But even Albert recognized he needed formal credentials to pursue a career in science. Without completing the gymnasium, he couldn't enter a German university, but Switzerland offered an alternative. The Swiss Federal Polytechnic in Zurich, known for its progressive approach and scientific rigor, would accept students who passed its entrance examination regardless of whether they had completed traditional schooling. In October 1895, the 16-year-old traveled to Zurich to take the exam, confident in his mathematical and scientific abilities. The results humbled him. While he excelled brilliantly in mathematics and physics, he failed the sections on languages, botany, and zoology. The examiners, impressed by his mathematical talent, suggested he spend a year completing his secondary education at a Swiss school and then reapply. The principal of the Polytechnic's physics department, Heinrich Friedrich Weber, invited Albert to audit his lectures even before formal admission, recognizing the young man's exceptional promise. It was encouragement, but also a reminder that even genius requires systematic preparation. Albert enrolled at the cantonal school in Aarau, a small Swiss town that would prove transformative. The school's director, Jost Winteler, ran an institution radically different from the German schools Albert had known. Teachers encouraged questions, fostered independent thinking, and treated students as developing intellectuals rather than empty vessels to be filled. The Winteler family took Albert into their home as a boarder, surrounding him with warmth, intellectual stimulation, and genuine affection. For the first time, school became a place of joy rather than torment. Living with the Wintelers introduced Albert to a more humane way of being. Jost Winteler was a humanist who believed education should develop character and critical thinking, not just transmit information. The family engaged in lively dinner conversations about politics, science, philosophy, and ethics. They played music together, debated ideas freely, and showed genuine interest in each other's thoughts. Albert flourished in this environment, his personality opening like a flower finding sunlight. He even developed a romantic attachment to Marie Winteler, the family's daughter, though the relationship would not survive his move to Zurich. During his year in Aarau at age 16, Albert conducted a thought experiment that would haunt and guide him for the next decade. He imagined himself riding alongside a beam of light, traveling at light speed while observing the light wave beside him. According to classical physics, if he matched the light's speed, the wave should appear stationary, frozen in space. Yet Maxwell's equations, which described electromagnetic phenomena including light, contained no provision for stationary light waves. The contradiction fascinated and troubled him. Something fundamental about the nature of light and motion had to be misunderstood. This thought experiment revealed Einstein's unique approach to physics. While others focused on laboratory experiments and mathematical derivations, Albert began with simple, imaginative scenarios that exposed conceptual problems. He trusted that if he could clearly envision a physical situation and identify contradictions in Chapter 3, The Patent Office Years. The year 1900 marked both triumph and crisis for Albert Einstein. He successfully passed his final examinations at the Polytechnic, earning his diploma as a secondary school physics teacher, but the celebration was short-lived. While his classmates received appointments as teaching assistants at the Polytechnic or positions at other universities, Albert received nothing. His professors, alienated by his arrogance and irregular attendance, offered no recommendations. He had burned bridges with the very people whose support was essential for an academic career. For 2 years, Albert drifted through various temporary positions, each one a reminder of how far he was from his dreams. He worked briefly as a tutor for the children of wealthy families, but his unconventional teaching methods and inability to suffer fools quietly led to quick dismissals. He took a temporary position at a technical school in Winterthur, teaching mathematics to students who had little interest in the subject. The work paid poorly and offered no prospect of advancement. Meanwhile, his relationship with Mileva grew more complicated as her pregnancy in 1901 forced them to confront realities neither was prepared to face. The birth of their daughter Liesl in January 1902 in Serbia, where Mileva had returned to her family, created a crisis. Unmarried and unemployed, Albert was in no position to acknowledge or support a child. The exact fate of Liesl remains one of history's mysteries. The baby may have been given up for adoption or may have died from scarlet fever in infancy. Albert never met his daughter, and in later years, he never spoke of her. The silence around Liesl would haunt assessments of Einstein's character. revealing a capacity for emotional compartmentalization that contrasted sharply with his warm public image. In June 1902, salvation came from an unexpected source. Marcel Grossman, Albert's faithful friend from university whose notes had saved him during examinations, now saved him again. Grossman's father recommended Albert for a position at the Swiss Patent Office in Bern. The job, evaluating patent applications for new inventions, had nothing to do with theoretical physics, but it offered a steady salary, reasonable hours, and most importantly, financial independence. In June, Albert began work as a technical expert third class, examining applications for devices ranging from electrical machines to mechanical contraptions. The patent office proved unexpectedly perfect for Albert's needs. The work required him to quickly understand the principles behind various inventions, to identify the essential ideas hidden within complex descriptions, and to determine whether applications represented genuine innovations or merely obvious variations on existing designs. These skills, analyzing complex situations to extract fundamental principles, aligned perfectly with his approach to physics. Moreover, the job ended at predictable hours, leaving evenings and weekends free for his own research. Director Friedrich Haller ran a relaxed office where, once his assigned work was complete, Albert could pursue his own interests. In January 1903, Albert and Mileva finally married in a small civil ceremony. No family members attended. Both sets of parents opposed the match. Albert's mother, Pauline, had been particularly cruel in her objections to Mileva, making disparaging comments about her appearance and her Serbian heritage. Hermann had been more measured in his opposition, but had also urged Albert to reconsider. The young couple set up a modest household in Bern, living simply on Albert's patent office salary. Mileva, whose own dreams of a physics career had been derailed by motherhood and societal expectations, now managed their home while Albert pursued his research. Their son Hans Albert was born in May 1904, bringing joy but also additional financial pressures. Albert was now 25 years old, working at a patent office with a wife and child to support and no recognition whatsoever in the scientific community. To outside observers, he appeared to be exactly what he dreaded becoming, a minor civil servant with youthful dreams long abandoned. Yet appearances deceived. In the privacy of his small Bern apartment, working late into the evenings after his family slept, Albert was preparing to revolutionize physics. For years, Albert had been deeply troubled by inconsistencies in physics. Classical mechanics, as formulated by Newton, described motion through space with extraordinary precision. Maxwell's equations described electromagnetic phenomena, including light, with equal elegance. But the two frameworks didn't fit together properly. Various experiments, particularly the famous Michelson-Morley experiment, had failed to detect the luminiferous ether, the medium through which light waves were supposedly traveling. Something fundamental was wrong with the prevailing understanding. Albert approached these problems differently than other physicists. While most researchers focused on modifying existing theories to accommodate troublesome experimental results, he questioned the fundamental assumptions underlying those theories. He asked what seemed like simple questions. Chapter 4. The Rising Star. The years following 1905 proved frustrating for Albert Einstein. He had published groundbreaking papers that would eventually transform physics, but recognition came agonizingly slowly. He continued working at the patent office, examining applications for brewing equipment and electrical generators, while his revolutionary ideas languished in obscurity. The disconnect between his accomplishments and his circumstances weighed on him. He had reimagined space and time, yet he remained a technical expert third class, earning a modest salary and gaining no acknowledgement from the scientific establishment. Gradually, however, a few perceptive physicists began to notice. Max Planck, the eminent German physicist whose work on black-body radiation had launched the quantum revolution, was among the first to recognize the significance of relativity. Planck assigned his assistant to work on relativistic problems and discussed Einstein's ideas in his lectures at the University of Berlin. Others followed. By 1907, a small but growing number of researchers were citing Einstein's work, extending his ideas, and debating their implications. The patent clerk was becoming known, if only to a select circle. In 1907, Albert took a significant step toward academic respectability by completing his habilitation thesis, the advanced qualification required for university teaching in German-speaking countries. He submitted his work to the University of Bern, hoping to gain the right to teach as a private docent, an unpaid lecturer who survived on student fees. His first submission was rejected for being too short. He submitted a longer version, which was accepted in early 1908. At age 29, while still working full-time at the patent office, he began teaching evening courses on thermodynamics and the theory of radiation to a handful of students. The lectures were not a success. Albert's teaching style, brilliant in one-on-one discussions with dedicated students, translated poorly to formal classroom instruction. He started with just 4 students. By the second semester, only 2 remained, and one of those was his friend Michel Bessot from the patent office. Albert's tendency to become lost in thought, to wander off on tangents, and to assume students shared his intuitive grasp of physics made him a challenging lecturer. Yet these early teaching experiences helped him clarify his ideas and strengthened his conviction that physics should be taught through conceptual understanding rather than mathematical formalism. Meanwhile, his personal life grew more complicated. His marriage to Mileva, initially built on shared intellectual interests, was deteriorating under the strains of limited finances, professional disappointment, and incompatible temperaments. Mileva had hoped to be Albert's scientific partner, but motherhood and his increasing focus on relativity left little room for collaboration. She grew depressed and resentful. Albert, absorbed in his work, had little patience for emotional demands. Their second son, Eduard, was born in July 1910, but even this addition to their family couldn't bridge the growing distance between them. In 1909, the academic world finally began opening doors. The University of Zurich, where Albert had studied and where he had applied unsuccessfully several times before, offered him an associate professorship. After 7 years at the patent office, he accepted immediately. The salary was actually lower than his patent office wages, and the teaching load was heavy, but it was a genuine academic position at a respected institution. At 30 years old, Albert Einstein became Professor Einstein. His colleagues, initially skeptical of the former patent clerk, soon recognized his extraordinary depth of thought and his unique approach to physics. But Albert remained at Zurich only briefly. In 1911, the German university in Prague offered him a full professorship at a substantially higher salary. Despite the prestige of remaining in Switzerland, the financial security was compelling, and Albert accepted. Prague was a beautiful city rich in history, but the Einsteins never felt at home there. Mileva found the city provincial compared to Zurich and felt isolated from friends. Chapter 5. Wartime and Revolution. In April 1914, Albert Einstein made a decision that would prove both professionally triumphant and personally devastating. He accepted an extraordinary offer from Berlin to join the Prussian Academy of Sciences with no teaching obligations, a generous salary, and complete freedom to pursue research. It was every scientist's dream. The position would place him among Germany's scientific elite, with access to the finest libraries and the most brilliant colleagues. For his work on relativity, Berlin offered ideal conditions. But for his marriage, already fragile, the move would be fatal. Mileva despised the idea of returning to Germany. She had never felt welcome in German-speaking academic circles, where casual anti-Slavic prejudice was common. More fundamentally, she recognized that Albert's family connections in Berlin would further marginalize her. Albert's cousin, Elsa Lowenthal, a divorced mother of two, had been writing him increasingly intimate letters. The emotional affair had been developing for years, and Mileva knew that in Berlin, with Elsa nearby, whatever remained of their marriage would crumble completely. The Einstein family moved to Berlin in spring 1914, but the arrangement lasted only months. The tensions that had been building for years exploded in bitter arguments. By July, Mileva took their sons, 11-year-old Hans Albert and 4-year-old Eduard, and returned to Zurich. Albert, relieved more than distressed, remained in Berlin. He drafted a coldly clinical document listing the conditions under which he would continue financial support. Mileva must ensure his clothes were kept in order, serve him 3 meals daily in his room, and expect no intimacy or companionship. She refused, and the separation became permanent. They would not divorce until 1919. But if Albert's personal life was in turmoil, his scientific work was reaching its climax. Free from teaching duties and domestic strife, he threw himself completely into general relativity. He worked 16-hour days, covering blackboards with equations, testing different mathematical formulations, searching for the precise way to express how matter and energy curved space-time, and how curved space-time told matter and energy how to move. The mathematics was extraordinarily difficult, and several times he thought he had found the answer, only to discover subtle errors. Then came August 1914, and Europe plunged into war. The conflict that would become known as the First World War began with mobilizations and invasions that shocked even those who had anticipated some form of armed confrontation. Within weeks, millions of men were marching towards slaughter in France and Belgium. The mood in Berlin transformed overnight from confident nationalism to grim determination. Albert, a committed pacifist who had renounced German citizenship years earlier and was now technically Swiss, watched the militarism around him with horror and disgust. The German academic establishment rallied enthusiastically to support the Kaiser's war. In October 1914, 93 prominent German intellectuals, including scientists, artists, and writers, signed a manifesto defending German militarism and denying German atrocities in Belgium. Many of Albert's colleagues signed without hesitation, swept up in nationalist fervor. Albert was appalled. At great personal risk, he signed a counter-manifesto calling for peace and European unity. Only 4 signatures appeared on this document, and it was never published during the war. Albert's pacifist stance isolated him further, though his scientific prestige provided some protection. Despite the chaos of war, or perhaps because focusing on pure physics provided escape from the surrounding madness, Albert made his final breakthrough. In November 1915, in a series of 4 lectures to the Prussian Academy, he presented the completed general theory of relativity. The field equations he derived were of breathtaking elegance and extraordinary complexity. They described how mass and energy determined the curvature of space-time and how that curvature determined the motion of matter and energy. Einstein's equations replaced Newton's theory of gravity, which had stood unchallenged for more than 2 centuries. The theory made several testable predictions that differed from Newtonian physics. Most dramatically, it predicted that Chapter 6, Global Celebrity. The transformation was bewildering. In November 1919, Albert Einstein had been a respected physicist known to specialists. By December, his name was recognized worldwide. Journalists besieged his Berlin apartment. Photographers captured his distinctive appearance, the thick mustache, the penetrating dark eyes, the rumpled clothing, the wild hair that would become his trademark. He received thousands of letters from admirers, cranks, autograph seekers, fellow physicists, students, and strangers. Fame, which he had never sought and wasn't entirely sure he wanted, had seized him completely. The public found Einstein compelling precisely because he didn't fit the image of a stereotypical scientist. He was warm, witty, accessible in interviews, and willing to discuss profound ideas in ways non-scientists could grasp. His theory was incomprehensibly difficult, a fact that added to his mystique. Yet he spoke about it with such clarity and enthusiasm that people believed they almost understood. His disheveled appearance and bohemian manner made him seem approachable rather than intimidating. Photographers loved him because his face expressed such character, and he accommodated them with good humor. In February 1919, shortly before his sudden fame, Albert had finally divorced Mileva after years of separation. The divorce settlement was unusual. He promised that if he ever won the Nobel Prize, the prize money would go to her. This was partly pragmatism, as Mileva demanded financial security for herself and their sons, and partly confidence, as Albert knew his work merited recognition. In June 1919, he married Elsa Lowenthal, his cousin who had supported him through the war and his illness. Their relationship lacked the intellectual partnership of his first marriage, but offered emotional stability and domestic peace. The Nobel Prize he had promised Mileva came in November 1922, though not for relativity as most expected. The Swedish Academy, conservative by nature and uncertain about relativity's philosophical implications, instead awarded him the Chapter 7, Escape from Darkness. The collapse of Germany's Weimar Republic happened with terrifying speed. In January 1933, Adolf Hitler became chancellor through a combination of electoral gains, political maneuvering, and backroom deals among conservative elites who thought they could control him. Within weeks, they discovered their fatal error. Hitler moved swiftly to dismantle democratic institutions, suppress opposition, and implement the Nazi Party's anti-Semitic agenda. For Jewish Germans, even those of Einstein's stature, the atmosphere turned threatening almost overnight. Einstein was not in Germany when Hitler came to power. He had left in December 1932 for a visiting professorship at the California Institute of Technology in Pasadena, his third winter visit to the United States. Elsa accompanied him, and as reports from Germany grew more alarming, both realized they could never return. The man who had been Germany's most famous scientist, a symbol of Weimar culture, was now marked as an enemy by the new regime. Nazi propaganda singled him out as an exemplar of Jewish physics and cosmopolitan treachery. His property was confiscated, his citizenship revoked, and his position at the Prussian Academy terminated. The decision to remain in exile was made easier by a generous offer from the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. Abraham Flexner, founding director of the institute, had been courting Einstein for years, offering him a position with no teaching obligations, complete research freedom, and a substantial salary. In October 1933, Einstein and Elsa arrived in the United States, initially intending the stay to be temporary. But as events in Germany deteriorated and war clouds gathered over Europe, temporary exile became permanent immigration. At 54, Einstein was starting over in a new country. Princeton proved an odd fit for the cosmopolitan European. The town was quiet, provincial, centered around its university and the new institute. After the intellectual ferment of Berlin, with its cafes, concert halls, and constant stimulation, Princeton felt sleepy and constrained. Einstein and Elsa bought a simple wood frame house at 112 Mercer Street, unpretentious and comfortable. Albert walked to his office at the institute each day, often lost in thought, oblivious to students who recognized him and tourists who photographed him. He became a familiar figure around town, the rumpled professor with the wild hair. But the quiet of Princeton contrasted sharply with the catastrophe unfolding in Europe. Einstein watched helplessly as Nazi Germany rearmed, as anti-Semitic persecution intensified, as colleagues and friends fled or disappeared. His sister Maya escaped Italy in 1939 and came to live with him in Princeton. Other relatives were less fortunate. The reports that filtered out of Europe grew more horrifying. Kristallnacht in November 1938, the night of broken glass when synagogues burned and Jewish businesses were destroyed, made clear that worse was coming. Einstein became active in efforts to help Jewish refugees escape Europe. He wrote countless letters of recommendation for scientists seeking visas to the United States. He used his fame to draw attention to the refugee crisis. He worked with organizations trying to resettle desperate families. The work was frustrating, as American immigration quotas remained tight and many who applied for help could not be saved. Yet he persisted, knowing that each successful rescue was a life preserved. The irony was not lost on him. The man who had always seen science as transcending nationality now devoted enormous energy to the very national and tribal concerns he had once found limiting. Elsa's health had been declining, and in December 1936 she died of heart and kidney disease. Einstein grieved, but in his characteristic fashion, by working even harder. His household was now managed by his secretary Helen Dukas, who had been with him since 1928 and would remain his assistant for the rest of his life, and by his sister Maya, whose presence provided companionship and connection to his past. His stepdaughter Margot also lived nearby. It was a comfortable domestic arrangement, if unconventional, and it freed Albert from practical concerns so he could focus on physics. His scientific work during these Princeton years focused almost entirely on the unified field theory, his attempt to merge gravity and electromagnetism into a single theoretical framework. Most physicists considered this quest premature. The strong and weak nuclear forces, both unknown when Einstein began his search, clearly existed and needed to be incorporated into any truly unified theory. Moreover, quantum mechanics, which Einstein still resisted philosophically, seemed essential to understanding fundamental interactions. But Einstein remained committed to his vision, perhaps as much from stubbornness as insight. Then came August 1939 and a letter that would haunt Einstein for the rest of his life. Leo Szilard, a Hungarian physicist who had fled to America along with fellow émigrés Eugene Wigner and Edward Teller, came to Einstein with alarming news. Recent experiments in Germany had demonstrated nuclear fission, the splitting of uranium atoms. The implications were clear to these physicists. A bomb of unprecedented destructive power was possible, and Nazi Germany had the scientists and resources to build it. They convinced Einstein, whose fame gave him access to the highest levels of government, to sign a letter to President Franklin Roosevelt warning of this danger. The letter, dated August 2, 1939, carefully explained the science and urged immediate American research into atomic weapons. Einstein's signature gave the warning credibility. Roosevelt, initially cautious, eventually authorized funding for preliminary research. This small beginning would grow into the Manhattan Project, the massive secret program that built the first atomic bombs. Einstein himself was excluded from the project due to security concerns about his pacifist past and liberal associations, but his equation E equals mc squared provided the theoretical foundation for understanding atomic energy. When war finally came in September 1939 with Germany's invasion of Poland, Einstein's worst fears were realized. The conflict would be more total, more destructive than the First World War. Modern technology, including aircraft and tanks, made warfare more mobile and deadly, and this time there was no doubt about the nature of the enemy. The Nazi regime was not merely authoritarian, but actively genocidal, though the full extent of the Holocaust would not become clear until war's end. Einstein, a committed pacifist, found himself supporting the war effort as a terrible necessity. He contributed to the war effort in small ways, auctioning off a handwritten copy of his 1905 Relativity paper to raise money for bonds, consulting occasionally on weapons projects unrelated to atomic bombs, and using his voice to encourage American resolve. But mostly, he continued his research, isolated in Princeton while the world burned. News from Europe was scarce and frightening. He didn't know the fate of many colleagues and relatives. The concentration camps were rumored, but their full horror remained hidden. All he could do was wait and work and hope. Chapter 8, The Princeton Years. Life in Princeton during the war years took on a strange quality of suspended animation for Einstein. While millions fought and died across Europe and Asia, he continued his quiet routine of walking to his office, working on equations, and returning home for dinner. The disconnect between the peaceful American town and the global catastrophe was disorienting. He followed war news obsessively through newspapers and radio broadcasts, but could do nothing to influence events. The frustration of being a bystander to history's greatest conflict weighed heavily on him. His sister Maya's presence provided comfort, though she suffered a stroke in 1946 that left her bedridden. Each evening, Albert would sit beside her bed reading aloud, often from the ancient Greek and Roman classics they both loved. These quiet hours with his sister, who had known him since childhood and understood him better than almost anyone, became a treasured ritual. When Maya died in 1951, Einstein felt the loss deeply. She had been his last connection to his early life, to the family that had shaped him. On August 6, 1945, an American B-29 bomber dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, Japan. 3 days later, a second bomb destroyed Nagasaki. The weapons killed over 200,000 people, mostly civilians, in seconds. Japan surrendered within days, ending World War II. When Einstein heard the news, his response was anguished. Though he had signed the letter warning Roosevelt about German atomic research, he had assumed any bomb would be used only as a deterrent or against military targets, if at all. The obliteration of 2 cities horrified him. In the years following the war, Einstein became increasingly vocal about the dangers of nuclear weapons. He joined with other scientists, including Niels Bohr and Bertrand Russell, to warn that atomic bombs made war between great powers tantamount to species suicide. He called for international control of nuclear technology, for disarmament, for a world government that could prevent future conflicts. His advocacy was sincere and passionate, but ultimately ineffective. The Cold War was beginning, and both the United States and Soviet Union were racing to build larger arsenals. Politicians and generals had little patience for scientists' warnings. Einstein also spoke out against the anti-communist hysteria that gripped America in the late 1940s and early 50s. When Senator Joseph McCarthy and others began accusing scientists, artists, and intellectuals of communist sympathies, often destroying careers with unsubstantiated charges, Einstein was appalled. He saw echoes of Nazi tactics in the demand for loyalty oaths and the persecution of dissent. When colleagues were called before congressional committees, Einstein advised them to refuse cooperation with what he called an inquisition. His stance made him controversial, but reflected his lifelong instinct to oppose authoritarianism in any form. His scientific work during these years produced no major breakthroughs. He continued seeking his unified field theory, publishing papers announcing solutions that never quite worked. Younger physicists were making exciting discoveries in particle physics and quantum field theory, areas where Einstein had little to contribute. Visitors to Princeton would find him at his blackboard, covered with tensor equations, still searching for the elegant mathematical structure that would unite all of physics. He knew most scientists considered his quest futile, but he persisted with quiet determination. Yet his influence remained profound in unexpected ways. In 1947, 2 physicists, John Wheeler and Richard Feynman, visited Einstein to discuss their work on action at a distance in electrodynamics. Though Einstein was skeptical of their approach, the conversation led them to important insights. Throughout the 40s and 50s, younger physicists continued to seek him out, hoping to learn from the legendary figure. He was generous with his time, willing to discuss ideas even when they contradicted his own views. His office hours at the Institute were legendary for the depth of conversation and the breadth of topics discussed. Einstein's personal life settled into contented routines. He sailed on the small lake near Princeton, though he never learned to swim and often capsized, requiring rescue by annoyed locals. He played his violin, though his fingers grew stiffer with age. He corresponded with a vast network of colleagues, friends, and strangers, his secretary Helen Dukas managing the overwhelming volume of mail. He granted interviews to journalists, always emphasizing the importance of peace, scientific education, and individual freedom. His disheveled appearance and humble demeanor made him a beloved public figure. In 1952, after the death of Israel's first president, Chaim Weizmann, Einstein was offered the presidency of Israel. The offer was sincere, a recognition of his symbolic importance to the Jewish people and his long support for Zionism, Einstein was deeply moved but declined immediately. He wrote that he lacked the natural aptitude and experience for dealing with people and exercising official functions. The humility was genuine. At 73, he had no desire for political responsibility. His contribution to Israel would be through advocacy and fundraising for the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, not governance. His health, never robust, was declining. In 1948, doctors discovered an abdominal aortic aneurysm during surgery for a different condition. The bulging artery was life-threatening, but surgical techniques of the era made repair extremely risky. Einstein refused further operations, accepting that the aneurysm would eventually rupture and kill him. He discussed the matter calmly, noting that he had had enough of life and was ready for death when it came. This acceptance of mortality reflected both his scientific understanding of the body's inevitable decay and his philosophical nature. Throughout the early 1950s, he remained active despite physical limitations. He continued working on unified field theory, corresponded voluminously, and spoke out on issues he considered important. His 75th birthday in March 1954 brought a flood of tributes from around the world. Newspapers published special supplements celebrating his contributions. Scientists held symposia discussing his work. The attention made him uncomfortable, but he acknowledged the affection with grace. He knew his most important work lay decades in the past, but he was grateful his ideas had proven so fruitful. Chapter 9. The Atomic Age. The 1950s brought Einstein both continued celebrity and a deepening sense of isolation from mainstream physics. The younger generation of physicists, brilliant and energetic, were pushing quantum mechanics into new territories, developing quantum field theory, discovering new particles in accelerator experiments, and building the theoretical framework that would become the standard model of particle physics. Einstein followed these developments with interest but from a distance. His conviction that quantum mechanics was incomplete remained unshaken despite the theory's mounting experimental successes. In 1955, Einstein participated in one of his most famous public acts. Bertrand Russell, the British philosopher and peace activist, drafted a manifesto warning humanity about the dangers of nuclear weapons. The Russell-Einstein Manifesto, signed by Einstein just days before his death, called on scientists and world leaders to find peaceful means of settling disputes and to remember their humanity above all else. The document concluded with a stark choice facing civilization. Shall we choose death or life? Humanity could abolish war, or war would abolish humanity. The manifesto reflected Einstein's growing despair about the nuclear arms race. By the mid-50s, both the United States and Soviet Union possessed hydrogen bombs thousands of times more powerful than the weapons that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Each superpower was building intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of delivering these weapons across the globe in minutes. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction, which would dominate Cold War strategy, was taking shape. Einstein saw clearly that humanity now possessed the technical means for its own extinction, but lacked the wisdom to prevent it. Despite his pessimism about nuclear weapons, Einstein maintained faith in science itself and in human reason. He believed that education, particularly scientific education that taught critical thinking, offered humanity's best hope. He advocated for reforms in science teaching, arguing that students should understand the historical development of ideas and the human element in scientific discovery, not just memorize facts and equations. Science, properly taught, would cultivate the open-minded, questioning attitude essential for democratic society. His own relationship with religion and philosophy deepened in his final years. Though never conventionally religious, Einstein described himself as having a cosmic religious feeling, a sense of awe at the order and beauty of nature. He spoke of God frequently, but meant something very different from the personal God of traditional religion. His God was Spinoza's God, the rational structure of the universe itself, not a deity who intervened in human affairs. This philosophical position frustrated both believers, who wished he would embrace faith, and atheists, who wished he would abandon religious language entirely. Einstein also remained committed to civil rights and social justice. When the African-American singer Marian Anderson was denied a hotel room in Princeton because of her race, Einstein invited her to stay in his home, beginning a friendship that lasted years. He spoke out forcefully against American racial segregation, calling it a disease of white people. When W.E.B. Du Bois, the civil rights leader, faced prosecution for his political activities, Einstein offered to testify on his behalf. These actions, combined with his earlier opposition to McCarthyism, kept him under FBI surveillance throughout the 50s. The FBI file on Einstein, compiled over decades, eventually exceeded 1,400 pages. J. Edgar Hoover, the Bureau's director, considered Einstein a security risk due to his associations with peace groups and civil rights organizations, many of which the FBI suspected of communist influence. Agents investigated his past, interviewed his colleagues, and monitored his activities. Had they read his scientific papers, they would have found them incomprehensible. Had they understood his actual political positions, they would have found him liberal but hardly radical, a believer in democracy and individual liberty rather than any totalitarian ideology. As 1955 began, Einstein was 76 years old and increasingly frail. The abdominal aneurysm continued to expand slowly, and he experienced periodic pain that he managed stoically. He knew death could come at any time, but continued working with remarkable focus. His assistants at the Institute helped him develop his latest version of unified field theory, though Einstein himself recognized the work was incomplete. He joked that dying before solving the problem at least meant he wouldn't have to accept that it might be insoluble. On April 13, 1955, the aneurysm began leaking. Einstein experienced severe abdominal pain and was taken to Princeton Hospital. Doctors confirmed the rupture and offered emergency surgery, but Einstein refused. He had lived his life according to his own principles, and he would die the same way. He told his doctors that he wanted to go when he wanted, and that it was tasteless to prolong life artificially. He would die naturally, without medical heroics. The doctors respected his decision, making him comfortable while they waited for the inevitable. In the hospital, Einstein asked for his latest pages of equations, continuing to work on unified field theory almost until the end. Helen Dukas brought the papers and he studied them, making small corrections. He knew he wouldn't finish, but the work itself had become its own justification. On the night of April 17th, Einstein spoke a few words in German to the night nurse, who didn't understand the language. Then he took 2 deep breaths and died peacefully. He was 76 years old. The equations lay beside his bed. unfinished testimony to a mind that worked until its final moments. Chapter 10. Final Years and Eternal Legacy. News of Albert Einstein's death on April 18, 1955 spread rapidly around the world. Newspapers published special editions. Radio stations interrupted programming with the announcement. World leaders issued statements acknowledging the loss of one of humanity's greatest minds. The New York Times devoted its entire front page to Einstein's death and legacy. For millions who had never understood relativity or quantum theory, Einstein represented something larger than physics. He embodied the power of human intellect, the possibility that reason could illuminate the deepest mysteries of existence. According to Einstein's wishes, there was no funeral service, no grave for pilgrims to visit. His body was cremated and his ashes scattered at an undisclosed location. He had wanted no monuments, no shrines, nothing that would encourage personality cult. His modesty was genuine. He saw himself as fortunate to have been able to contribute to humanity's understanding of nature, but he didn't believe this warranted special veneration. Knowledge was built collectively across generations. His contribution, however revolutionary, was part of that larger human project. Yet, even Einstein couldn't entirely control his legacy. Thomas Harvey, the pathologist who performed the autopsy, removed Einstein's brain without permission, hoping to study it for clues to genius. The brain was preserved, sectioned, and studied for decades. Though no definitive conclusions emerged about what made Einstein's mind exceptional, some researchers reported unusual features in certain brain regions, but others questioned the significance of these findings. The whole episode, well-intentioned but ethically problematic, revealed how difficult it was to separate the man from the legend. In the decades following his death, Einstein's scientific legacy only grew. His work on special and general relativity became the foundation for modern physics. Every GPS satellite uses relativistic corrections to maintain accuracy. Every black hole observation confirms his predictions about extreme gravity. The gravitational waves he thought would never be detected were observed in 2015 by LIGO, the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, exactly 100 years after he published the field equations that predicted them. Each observation opened new windows onto the universe, from merging black holes to colliding neutron stars. Einstein's work on the photoelectric effect and light quanta helped establish quantum mechanics, though he never accepted the theory's probabilistic interpretation. The debates he had with Niels Bohr drove both men to clarify their positions and contributed to deeper understanding of quantum foundations. His thought experiments, particularly the EPR paradox proposed with Boris Podolsky and Nathan Rosen, identified genuine puzzles about quantum entanglement that researchers still explore today. Even his resistance to quantum mechanics proved scientifically fruitful, forcing the theory's defenders to address fundamental questions. The unified field theory that consumed Einstein's later years remains incomplete. Modern physics recognizes four fundamental forces: gravity, electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force. The Standard Model successfully describes the latter three within quantum field theory, but cannot incorporate gravity. String theory and other approaches attempt the unification Einstein sought, but a final theory remains elusive. His vision was not wrong, merely premature. The tools needed to achieve it may still not exist. Beyond technical physics, Einstein's influence extended to philosophy, politics, and culture. His advocacy for nuclear disarmament and his warnings about the dangers of atomic weapons helped establish the tradition of scientists speaking out on policy issues. The Pugwash Conferences on Science and World Affairs, inspired partly by the Russell-Einstein Manifesto, brought together scientists from both sides of the Cold War to discuss arms control. His commitment to civil rights and social justice inspired generations of activists. His model of the publicly engaged intellectual remains influential. Einstein's image became iconic in ways that transcend science. The photograph by Arthur Sassa showing Einstein sticking out his tongue on his 72nd birthday captured his playful irreverence. The image adorned countless dorm rooms, T-shirts, and posters, making Einstein a symbol of anti-authoritarian cleverness. His wild hair, casual dress, and quotable wisdom made him perhaps the only scientist who achieved genuine pop culture status. He represented the idea that genius could be eccentric, that brilliance didn't require conformity. His writings on science, philosophy, and society, collected in numerous volumes, continue to inspire readers. His essays combined profound insight with accessible language, making complex ideas comprehensible without oversimplification. His thoughts on education, emphasizing imagination over memorization and understanding over rote learning, influenced pedagogical theory. His reflections on the relationship between science and religion, his defense of intellectual freedom, and his vision of a peaceful world order remain relevant decades after his death. Biographies of Einstein proliferate, each attempting to understand the man behind the equations. They reveal a complex personality, warm and distant, playful and serious, generous and self-absorbed. His treatment of his first wife and his daughter Liesel raises difficult questions about the personal costs of genius. His later pacifism couldn't erase his role, however indirect, in enabling atomic weapons. His support for civil rights coexisted with personal relationships that sometimes objectified women. He was, in short, fully human, with virtues and flaws that made him no less remarkable. The Einstein Papers Project, established to publish his complete writings and correspondence, has revealed the breadth of his interests and the development of his thought. Tens of thousands of documents, from technical papers to personal letters, show a mind ranging across science, philosophy, politics, and daily life. The volumes, still being published nearly 70 years after his death, demonstrate that understanding Einstein requires seeing his physics within the context of his entire intellectual life. Science for him was never separate from broader questions about knowledge, society, and human purpose. Universities and research institutes named for Einstein operate worldwide, from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York to the Einstein Center for Mathematics in Berlin. The Hebrew University of Jerusalem, which Einstein helped establish and to which he bequeathed his literary estate, houses his archives. These institutions extend his legacy, training new generations of scientists and scholars who carry forward the tradition of rigorous creative inquiry he exemplified. Time magazine named Einstein Person of the Century for the 20th century, acknowledging not just his scientific achievements but his broader cultural impact. The choice was controversial, with other figures like Gandhi, Roosevelt, and Churchill having strong claims, but it reflected Einstein's unique position as both scientific revolutionary and public intellectual. He had demonstrated that understanding nature at its deepest level required overthrowing comfortable assumptions. Space and time weren't fixed. Mass and energy were equivalent. The universe was stranger and more wonderful than humans had imagined. For contemporary physicists, Einstein remains an inspirational figure but also a cautionary tale. His early work showed the power of Gedanken experiments, thought experiments that identified conceptual problems before turning to mathematics. His later work showed the danger of becoming too committed to particular approaches, as his resistance to quantum mechanics and his focus on unification may have cost him opportunities to contribute to other developments. The lesson drawn is that even genius benefits from humility before evidence and openness to ideas that challenge one's intuitions. Einstein's story resonates because it combines extraordinary intellectual achievement with genuine humanity. He wasn't a cold, calculating machine, but someone who loved music, sailing, and conversation. He formed deep friendships, experienced marital troubles, worried about his children, and struggled with the responsibilities his fame brought. He cared deeply about social justice and world peace, using his celebrity to advocate causes he believed in even when doing so was personally costly. He showed that brilliant scientist and engaged citizen were complementary roles, not contradictory ones. Looking back from decades later, several aspects of Einstein's legacy seem particularly significant. First, his demonstration that revolutionary advances in science often come from questioning basic assumptions rather than incrementally extending existing theories. The willingness to ask what simultaneity means or how we know two events happen at the same time led to relativity. Second, his insistence that physical theories should be conceptually clear, that mathematical formalism should serve physical understanding rather than replace it. Third, his example of sustained work on deep problems despite criticism and isolation. The questions Einstein grappled with remain central to physics today. What is the relationship between quantum mechanics and gravity? Can the fundamental forces be unified? What is the nature of time? What happened at the universe's beginning? Contemporary physicists using quantum computers, particle accelerators, and space-based telescopes are exploring questions Einstein helped formulate, even when approaching them with tools and frameworks he never imagined. His intellectual grandchildren populate physics departments worldwide, often without realizing how deeply his thinking shaped their field. Perhaps Einstein's greatest legacy is demonstrating that universe is comprehensible to human reason. The cosmos operates according to laws we can discover and express mathematically. Those laws are often counterintuitive, requiring us to revise deeply held assumptions about reality. But they can be found through patient observation, creative thought, and rigorous testing. In an era when authority and tradition were crumbling, when the horrors of world wars and totalitarianism might have prompted despair about human nature, Einstein showed that human intellect could still achieve transcendent understanding. Albert Einstein died in Princeton at age 76, having transformed physics, achieved global fame, and used his influence to advocate for peace and justice. His theories explain the cosmos at its largest and smallest scales. His equations underlie modern technology from GPS to nuclear energy. His words inspire scientists, students, and anyone drawn to understand nature's deepest secrets. He proved that imagination could reveal reality more accurately than common sense, that mathematics could describe physical truth, and that one person's ideas could change humanity's understanding of existence itself. The boy who was enchanted by a compass needle at age 5 had spent his life following invisible forces to their sources. He navigated by an internal compass that pointed toward truth, regardless of whether the direction was popular or easy. He showed courage in pursuing ideas that contradicted accepted wisdom, humility in acknowledging what remained unknown, and hope that human reason could illuminate the darkness. His life was, in the deepest sense, a triumph of curiosity over complacency, of wonder over routine, and of mind over matter. The universe he revealed was strange, beautiful, and ultimately comprehensible, a gift to every generation that follows. Perhaps Einstein's greatest legacy is demonstrating that universe is comprehensible to human reason. The cosmos operates according to laws we can discover and express mathematically. Those laws are often counterintuitive, requiring us to revise deeply held assumptions about reality. But they can be found through patient observation, creative thought, and rigorous testing. In an era when authority and tradition were crumbling, when the horrors of world wars and totalitarianism might have prompted despair about human nature, Einstein showed that human intellect could still achieve transcendent understanding. Albert Einstein died in Princeton at age 76, having transformed physics, achieved global fame, and used his influence to advocate for peace and justice. His theories explain the cosmos at its largest and smallest scales. His equations underlie modern technology from GPS to nuclear energy. His words inspire scientists, students, and anyone drawn to understand nature's deepest secrets. He proved that imagination could reveal reality more accurately than common sense, that mathematics could describe physical truth, and that one person's ideas could change humanity's understanding of existence itself. The boy who was enchanted by a compass needle at age 5 had spent his life following invisible forces to their sources. He navigated by an internal compass that pointed toward truth, regardless of whether the direction was popular or easy. He showed courage in pursuing ideas that contradicted accepted wisdom, humility in acknowledging what remained unknown, and hope that human reason could illuminate the darkness. His life was, in the deepest sense, a triumph of curiosity over complacency, of wonder over routine, and of mind over matter. The universe he revealed was strange, beautiful, and ultimately comprehensible, a gift to every generation that follows. Albert Einstein died in Princeton at age 76, having transformed physics, achieved global fame, and used his influence to advocate for peace and justice. His theories explain the cosmos at its largest and smallest scales. His equations underlie modern technology from GPS to nuclear energy. His words inspire scientists, students, and anyone drawn to understand nature's deepest secrets. He proved that imagination could reveal reality more accurately than common sense, that mathematics could describe physical truth, and that one person's ideas could change humanity's understanding of existence itself. The boy who was enchanted by a compass needle at age 5 had spent his life following invisible forces to their sources. He navigated by an internal compass that pointed toward truth, regardless of whether the direction was popular or easy. He showed courage in pursuing ideas that contradicted accepted wisdom, humility in acknowledging what remained unknown, and hope that human reason could illuminate the darkness. His life was, in the deepest sense, a triumph of curiosity over complacency, of wonder over routine, and of mind over matter. The universe he revealed was strange, beautiful, and ultimately comprehensible, a gift to every generation that follows. The boy who was enchanted by a compass needle at age 5 had spent his life following invisible forces to their sources. He navigated by an internal compass that pointed toward truth, regardless of whether the direction was popular or easy. He showed courage in pursuing ideas that contradicted accepted wisdom, humility in acknowledging what remained unknown, and hope that human reason could illuminate the darkness. His life was, in the deepest sense, a triumph of curiosity over complacency, of wonder over routine, and of mind over matter. The universe he revealed was strange, beautiful, and ultimately comprehensible, a gift to every generation that follows.